Welcome to the Myofascial Health podcast hosted by me, Unu. Follow along as I explore the depths of John Barnes' myofascial release approach on my road to mastery. Along the way, I'll be sharing the lessons I learn as I open my myofascial release practice in Austin, Texas, so that you don't have to make the same mistakes I do. Welcome back to the Myofascial Health podcast. Now, I'm joined today by a very special guest. She's a yogi. She molds the minds of the youth because she's a teacher, and she's been a myofascial release therapist since 2019. It's my honor to introduce Bozenna Johnson. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I've met you since your first MFR seminar, and the way that we met was very interesting. So it was a Key West vacation series in which you were only signed up for MFR1, but I had signed up for the whole series, which was MFR1, Unwinding 2, and Fascial Cranium. And I remember I didn't have a place to stay, and everything that I was trying to look into had gotten booked up. And so we had connected, and you said, hey, I have an extra bed in my hotel room, but I'm only going to be there for MFR1. So you'd have to figure out your own way for the rest of the seminar series. And I said, you know what? I feel like I'm just going to take this risk. We don't know how it's going to work out. And it was the first time that I had traveled by myself. And so I had met you, and it was just a natural connection. I kind of identify you as like a big sister. And I remember you were looking after me. And then on the first day, you were asking around saying, hey, my roommate is here for the whole series. I'm only here for the first part. Does anyone have a spare bed? And then we ran into Carly Brand, who I'm very good friends with, and that started that friendship. So I just want to say thank you so much for having an open heart and allowing me to take that step, because that was a huge moment for, I guess, the both of us. Can I ask you, I was a stranger at the time, and sometimes it can be a little bit fearful to allow strangers to be in your personal space. What allowed you to be so open and receptive?
I really feel that's just who I am in some ways. And knowing we were going for MFR1, I knew I wouldn't be necessarily spending a lot of time in a room. I thought the worst thing that happens is I have to either kick this guy out or I'm going to have to go find somebody else to stay with. But I felt like after our conversation on the phone before we ever got there, I was like, this is going to be great. We'll be absolutely fine. And I thought I don't have anything to lose at this point. And that's kind of part of my whole story, as you know. So we'll hold up on that for just another minute.
Well, let's get into that in this minute. What is your story? How did you even get into myofascial release?
So I was in my late 30s at that point. I want to say 38 to be exact. And I had suffered from migraines for decades. And I woke up one morning with a migraine and knew that if something didn't change in my life, I was going to be dead before I was 40. There was a very clear voice that said something needs to change. And at that point, I had already gone to neurologists. I had been to vision specialists. I had went to the chiropractor. I received massage every other week. So I was doing all the things that one would do when they're ailing, or so I thought. And I met somebody who said, I think I can help you. And part of me was like, yay. And the other part was like, really? You've already done all these other things. Why do you think this is going to work? But I also knew that I had nothing to lose. And so being on that table for the first time, I remember after my appointment, I had to take a nap in the car before I drove home. And I knew something was different because I was like, what is this thing even called? Myofascial what? And for me, massage was the only modality I knew that was like body work other than traditional physical therapy, occupational therapy, things like that. So having an MFR session was, I didn't know what I was getting into at the time, but I'm so grateful that I did because my life took a 180 from that point. And it's just, I've been so blessed ever since.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember meeting you in those first seminars at MFR1, and you had like this tick almost, if you don't mind me sharing that.
Oh, go ahead.
And you had gotten treated, which allowed you to kind of process it because it would come up. And I remember you had said you had gotten hit in the face with like a softball or something. And that stuff can stay in your fascial system, and your story is common amongst myofascial release therapists. But before you discovered what it was, or myofascial release in general, so many people are caught up trying to heal, but chasing all these things that don't necessarily work, but you're lost. And so, I think you did a good job of accepting the change. Was there any fear around that, or are you just kind of at your end and you're like, yo, I just need something else?
I think in some ways there was fear eventually, not necessarily for the first few appointments. But then when I had to look at some of the things in my life and see things from a different perspective, that was the part where the fear came up. So I think I was walking blindly, just again, trying to find anything that would help me. And at that point, I wasn't fearful in a sense, but now I look back and see how fearful I truly was. And that I think was the sticking point of not wanting to, put my toes outside of the boundaries. And for me, that was a huge piece of my own healing and ultimately still is, just different layers and different forms of it.
What were those things that you had to shift your perspective on?
Pretty much everything in my life. Realistically, I wanted to be a perfectionist and I thought that was the way to go, making everybody else happy and not even realizing how much I had sacrificed of myself and what I wanted. I thought what others wanted was exactly what I wanted. And it was so far from the truth. And MFR, sessions and sessions and sessions and doing a lot of inner work is really what has allowed me to see so many of those pieces and aspects of my life and be able to be grateful for that part of me, but know that I have this bigger, expansive piece that I can be grateful for that young girl, that teenager, the 20, 30-year-old, and still sit here and go, wow, I'm so grateful. Thank you. And just know that like I'm continuing to be a better me every day.
That's amazing. I think something that John says is the most important journey isn't is sorry, the inner journey isn't the most important journey, it's the only journey. And it sounds like you have embarked on this inner journey, as many as of us have, and I am included in that myself. And you don't realize these things that kind of affect you on a subconscious level until you become aware of it, until you do your own inner work, that you realize these things. I think something you had said was perfectionism. And I can totally relate to that. Like I think being perfect was something that was held in high regard, especially for me in school, Asian, and getting A's was the standard. So anything below that was considered failing in a sense. And I wasn't like a straight A student, but I did fairly well in school. But when I started my own business, you realize those things don't matter. Making a 90% on something carries no weight in the real world. And something that John has mentioned is don't chase perfection, chase excellence. And as long as you're becoming a better person than you were yesterday, then that's all that matters. And it sounds like you've embraced this. So kudos to you for going on that journey. And I think we all are. And I think once you get to a place in life where you face your inner demons, face your soul, which can be ugly at times, then that's where you start growing. I think you even mentioned kind of being a people pleaser. And I think sometimes people will say, what's wrong with, trying to please somebody else? And it's like, there's nothing wrong with serving others. But if you have to abandon yourself in order to do so, then you're losing yourself for something else, right? Whereas where you're at now is you can be grateful for those experiences, but you choose yourself in the context of everything. And there's a very fine balance because I'm at this chapter in life where I'm learning how to serve others, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So you got to make sure that your cup is full. Otherwise, you're going to get burnt out. Your energy is going to be really low. And then that's going to affect others around you negatively. Now, something you'd mentioned was kind of speaking to these different stages of your life, whether it's your childlike version, adolescent, or even adult. Can you talk us through what that looks and feels like
Currently, you mean, or as I was going through it?
as you're going through it and the lessons or realizations you've come upon today?
Well, I'm just going to say it was not pretty. If we're being honest, it was not pretty at all. And I think some of it's those pieces that you don't want to see or that you don't want to acknowledge that I participated in this in some way, shape, or form. Whether, like you speaking to the subconscious piece of it, like I thought I was doing the best with the tools that I had. And I truly believe that I was. However, looking at it now with a completely different lens, with so many layers that have been stripped away, it's surprising to see that, like, where did I lose myself along the way? And being able to see that little by little, some of those pieces that just add up. It's really astonishing to say, like, oh my goodness, like I didn't realize I gave a piece of myself away here, or I didn't realize that I participated in this way of, I want to use the word self-harm, not necessarily in a physical way, but just that spiritual, emotional piece of not even realizing what I was doing to myself at the time. Yeah. So
So I think what you have described is kind of dissociating. I think sometimes whether you want to be part of the group or you want to have the attachment to your parents, you do something where you have to suppress your emotions, and that's where you're kind of giving that piece away. And so whether that's you as a child, which happens to a lot of us, adolescents, I think we have this story that we're more rebellious for some type of reason, and then you become an adult. And again, you kind of go through these chapters where you kind of recognize, man, where did I give a piece of myself away? And once you can accept that and forgive that chapter, you kind of feel lighter because it doesn't grab at you the same way. Something that I've learned in relationship is triggers, and I think I'm normal just like everybody else, and there's certain things that trigger me. And in the beginning, I was like, man, this sucks, like this thing that this person's doing is triggering me. So they need to stop. Whereas today, and it's still a work in progress, it's like, okay, what is causing me to get triggered by this event? And oftentimes it's because I haven't addressed this younger version of myself where I experienced the same thing that created this self-abandonment or whatever that creates now a trigger today. So that's the inner work that I am currently on. And I think that's a shift in my mindset that is totally different from where I was in the beginning of the relationship. Well, actually, in the beginning, it's the honeymoon phase. That's all great. But after that wears down, you kind of meet each other's souls. And that's where these unresolved childhood wounds will reveal themselves. And can you love them enough to be a partner, be their safe space, and vice versa, so that you can both grow together? I just recently got engaged to my now fiance, Yvette, and she has been someone who I believe is God sent because she's the person that challenges me to be better, even though I might not like the challenge in the moment, and she humbles me, like I am an MFR therapist and I feel like I'm well known in the community. And she's like, I don't like when you touch me. You can't do MFR on me. And I'm like, this is what I do. I'm like, this is something that I'm good at, but you can't ever force. You have to honor the space, and I just have to be like, all right, you can choose who you want to be. And I think she got treated at Therapy on the Rocks by Rob. And Rob had asked her, like, oh, does Unu treat you at home? And she's like, no, I don't let him, and Rob made a joke and was like, oh, well, I'm so honored for you to allow me to treat you. And I'm like, yep, that's right. That's right. So it's that is the journey though. And I will say that for us, we complement each other. And this is something that I think is common in relationships is you find your compatible opposite. And so that when you look at it from a global perspective, from a big picture, you see that you complement each other. So her strengths are my weaknesses and my strengths are her weaknesses. So when we have a big problem that we can tackle together, I think that we are unstoppable because we think at different ways or we process things differently to come up with the best solution together. But when we're in conflict, those differences work against each other because now we're just saying things like, how come you can't be more like me? And that is where I'm doing the inner healing work of saying, hey, that's not necessarily what's best for the relationship. And yeah, it's a continued process, but I'm happy to be engaged to her and take this next chapter in life. I think that's something to be celebrated. You celebrated me not only through text, but when we started this podcast. So I'm very happy for that. Can you share with us any experiences that you have with whether that be triggers or relationship?
Oh boy. Well, let's just say I'm going to use the word relationship loosely, as in even friends.
Yeah.
Being that I was such a people pleaser and such a giver, I didn't know how to receive. So part of what I've learned through MFR is being able to receive. I mean, it's been brought up numerous times with me, even on the table for a therapy for the therapists. T for T is what we call it in the MFR world. And I remember them saying, like, what would it feel like to just receive? And the first time I was like, well, of course I'm receiving. That's why I'm here. And then it got brought up again. And I'm like, what would it be like to receive? And so that's something that has been a huge shift in allowing others to serve me just as I would want to do the same for them. And I remember a friend saying, like, it's always okay when you're doing something for us, but when we want to do something for you, it seems to be like a problem. And for me, that was like, what? Like, is that really how they see that? And at first I took it so personally, right? Because that's, again, something else that I'm working on, is not taking things personally. And anymore, it almost doesn't even show up, I think, in my daily life. Whereas I didn't realize how personally I was taking things. And so that friendship has just gotten stronger because somebody was able to say, hey, like, here's where we are with what we want to do for you. And like, why? Like, what's your hang up there? And that was really hard to hear from this particular friend couple because they have done so much inner work over the years. And I look up to them not just as friends, but as mentors. And so hearing that from them was like, wow, Bozenna. And so again, that personal inner work and that self-reflection of what is it? Why am I so afraid? It leads you down different, I'm going to call them different rabbit holes of seeing things from the past and looking at things differently and be like, oh, I see that one now. Okay. So what do? You start working on it little by little, piece by piece. I knew nothing was going to shift tremendously. Like, it took a conscious effort to be able to make those shifts at first. And now it seems to be a little easier and it seems to flow a little more smoothly versus, I don't want to say trying to force it, but having that whole idea of, well, why not let them help you? Like, this is what they're willing to do. And so now I can just throw my hands up and say, I receive. And that is also compliments of a completely different couple elsewhere in the United States who brought the same thing to my attention yet again in a different way. So just so grateful for that as far as friendships go. And as far as relationship with a partner, he is the most wonderful man I've ever met. He supports me in everything I do. And again, it's a challenge for me. It's a challenge for someone to be so supportive. And I'm going to get teary because he truly has done his work, is doing his work. And I just feel like in some ways, like, this is not what I give back to you. And he says, like, you don't have to give me anything. And this has probably been the biggest struggle for me, being that people pleaser, that one who wants to do everything for somebody else. And I feel like in some ways I fall short. And I know I'm not falling short because he's still here. But that is a work in progress.
I love that. I think something that tends to happen is if you are meant to learn a lesson, then you will be reminded of this lesson until you learn it. And so, whether that's with friendships, two different couples, or the current relationship you're in now, it seems like there's a common theme that you've started this process with. And there's a book that comes to mind that John recommends. It's called The Four Agreements. And one of the agreements is don't take anything personal. And that is something that we all do from time to time. And so when you catch yourself getting triggered by something, oftentimes it's because you're taking it personal. And so if you can shift your mindset, just shift the thoughts you have around that, then you feel differently and you'll act differently. But without awareness, there's no choice. So it sounds like you've gone through this journey where, it kind of was more harsh in the beginning, and you're saying now it's more easier because you've actually confronted it. And I wish that healing was just a light switch. You just do it once and you're done. But these are things that have held on to you for years and years. And so make sure you have patience with these things. And especially for me, I need to learn to have patience with others, because sometimes I had that perfectionist mindset where it's like, I told somebody something once, how come it's not being done? And then I get frustrated. Whereas if I can come from a more compassionate heart and saying like, hey, this is going to take some time, it's going to take some reminders. And that is not about me. It's about how can I see you grow, which I'm hearing for you. Your partner is there for you. And something that is important about giving is you're giving without the expectation of receiving anything. If you are giving to get, then that's manipulation. But true giving nature is just giving just to give. And then I think that the universe will reward you and you'll get things back, but you can't expect it. There's a very different energy about that. Now, for those of us who have chronic people pleasing habits, how would you recommend or guide them on how to work through that?
Like you said, healing isn't just you can't flip a switch. It's the same with being a people pleaser. It takes practice. And originally I thought, oh, well, if my head can lead me on, I'd be good to go. And again, this was very at the beginning of my MFR journey. And so now looking back, like, just have grace with yourself and know that it's a practice. Everything is a practice. And that's probably one of the biggest things I've learned is it first, like I said, I would lead with my head thinking I had to almost talk myself into something because I was so good at just, well, that's not it, and shut it down or throw it out, whatever it might be. And I had no idea how to even come in some ways because my head was doing all of it. So when I say like I had to go to my head first to talk myself into something, like, wait, do you really have to do that for them? Could they do that for themselves? Or how can I support you in this and not necessarily do something for you, or whatever the case might be? And now I feel like it really is more heart centered and like leading with that energy of how is it I can support you? Is there something that I can do to help you out versus I'm going to do it for you and I have to fix this? I'm not going to fix anybody. Like, it's just that was a hard reality I had to face, being that people pleaser and wanting everything to be just perfect. I didn't want to see anybody, suffer or anything like that. And I'm like, Bozenna, now looking at it, that's the path that they're on. Like, hopefully I can step in and be just a little bit of a light for them. And, if they stick around, great. If they don't, best of luck on their path. But knowing that I am not responsible for anybody but myself has been a huge, huge opportunity for growth for me.
I think that you should also be grateful because I've seen you step in when someone is feeling overwhelmed, and your ability to hold space for them and tell them what they need to hear diffuses this energy that they're like getting really down on themselves. And I would say that is a gift that you have. And I have very much appreciated seeing that and feeling that in person. So, whether that stems from you being a people pleaser or not, I just know that you have this natural ability. And maybe it's because you work with kids to like when someone is upset, you have this way of diffusing the tension, which which I wish that I could do, and maybe I just need more practice with.
No, you just need more practice with it.
You got it. Now, when you are first standing your ground and not doing the people pleasing habit, did you ever feel mean or like, normally I do this thing, but now I do this thing, and now you're like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe it was a little harsh or rude. Did you go through that?
Absolutely. I mean, even the self-doubt piece of, well, now, they're going to go and they might not fix whatever it is that needs to be, done in their world or on their end. And I felt like I was mean. I felt like I wasn't supportive, possibly not even a good friend. And then I would go home and beat myself up because I felt like I made the situation worse. And looking back, I almost like chuckle, like, oh, sweet girl, you just didn't know any different. That's the reality of it because there are times even now I'll stop and ask myself, is this what I want? Or is this what somebody else is either expecting or whatever? Because usually those people have been woven, we're woven together within our patterns in some way, shape, or form. And some people didn't like it, and I've lost them along the way. And I wish them well and hope they're doing great. But at the same time, like it wasn't working for me. And so at first, that was really hard to feel like I did something wrong. And now I look back and say, no, it's what I needed. And I'm grateful for it.
So I think it can be tough to lose out on friends. And I've gone through this experience because I think I was in a similar light. Now, I wasn't a chronic people pleaser, but I would be like, I would make a lot of jokes and sometimes at my own detriment just to help people laugh and have a better feeling about themselves. And what I came to learn was, man, I'm like not respecting and honoring myself enough to just be myself without having to be at the butt of the jokes. And as I got into myofascial release and I learned about this authentic healing practice, and it's not linear, healing isn't linear, then it didn't make sense to a lot of the people that I was around at the time. And I remember I really struggled with like letting go because I feel like I'm pretty loyal as a person. And what I recognized is my inability to let go was my own vice. And it was once I was able to let go, I created space for new people to enter into my life that are now some of my closest friends. And Yvette is very much included in that. And so, like, that's the thing where it can be tough because I think what we want is that familiarity. You grew up with certain people or you knew certain things, and that just feels more comfortable. But that doesn't allow you to grow. And so, even though I've lost out on some friendships, that has created space for the new friends now that I do feel more comfortable with. I can be my authentic self. And now I can look back and say, man, I wouldn't trade that for anything. And if that's what you have to lose out on, what is it to lose out on friends who don't see you for who you are, than to just be your authentic self, to not have to wear a mask and play a role and just be yourself. I think something you had said is, I'll ask myself, is this what I want? Versus just kind of going into, oh, well, they want this, that. And you don't know. You don't know what anyone else is thinking. But when you are stuck in channel 5, you'll feel like you have to figure it out. And I think what you've described is shifting from channel 5 to channel 3. And just as a reminder for new listeners on this podcast, John talks about two channels to live life through. Channel 5, you can think of more like your left brain hemisphere. It's more logical, linear, rational, and that's where fear is thought to be. Versus your right brain is more creative, it's intuitive, it's joyful, it's where love is thought to be. And John is saying we need to be more in channel 3. Yes, channel 5 is always going to exist. But as we grow older, we become adults and we fall to the fears of the world and we lose our childlike essence. But I think what healing is just reconnecting with your childlike essence and saying, hey, where did I give these pieces away? And as you kind of collect them back, you find your joy again. You find these things that to do versus doing it because you have to or figuring things out. And so for anyone who's going through this journey where you feel like, man, I'm going through this shift, I'm going through these changes, but the friends or the people I'm around don't jive with that. It's okay. We've all been there and it is tough. Like it's not an easy process. But if there's one thing that I can recommend for anyone going through this, it's who would you rather be? You know, do you want to be that person who constantly has to wear a mask and expend this energy trying to do things to prove yourself? Or would you just rather be yourself? And there's so much energy in trying to wear that mask that once you take it off, and because you're so comfortable and used to it, it can be hard. But once you do it, that is total freedom. You know, you experience a level of bliss because you're not having to expend all this energy towards this fake narrative that you feel like you're supposed to do. Now, something that you have done here is you've gone far enough into myofascial release where I think I saw that you even assisted at a seminar. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where did you assist and how's that experience?
I've assisted probably more places than I can count at this point, and I'm so grateful to be able to meet people where they are on their MFR journey, whether it's their first class, whether they've taken every seminar, and just be able to hold space and give that same love back that was given to me originally, at the start of me being that new beginner in class, and just having the patience to sit with people for whatever reason. And it has been so eye-opening for me to see how far I've come, seeing myself through the lens of others and being able to have these new connections of people that want the same thing that I did on the journey of just being able to be healthy and happy and not feel like life is slipping away from them. And that is probably one of the biggest benefits, and being able to share my excitement and how much MFR has completely changed my life in the short time span that I was introduced to this work and now being an MFR practitioner.
I think that's something that I also enjoy is when I repeat some of the earlier seminars, like I just repeated Unwinding, you see the new faces and it's when you see that light that just pops open like, oh man, they get it, like they're facing parts of themselves, they're like you're just starting to see it. I think that's such a cool sensation to see, feel, and be a part of. And for those of us who have more experience now, I think it's nice to repeat. I know early on I was an MFR snob and I was like, oh, I only want to work with people who know this so I can get some treatment during the seminar. Now I'm at a place where it's like, ooh, let's see if this person has it. And if they don't have it yet, then how can I be someone who facilitates and helps them grow versus just kind of being like, yo, I don't get treated regularly. So this is where I need to get it done. So let me ask you, how is it being an assistant versus just being a regular participant?
I think it's different in so many ways because the space holding seems to be that much more. Still, in some ways, I feel like going in, even assisting, I feel like I'm a beginner, like hearing the techniques again and just over and over the same things I've heard probably 10 times, but they show up in a different way because I'm more open to receiving those things. And I remember the first experience of assisting. I mean, I was so nervous. I thought I was going to be sick. And that was part of me trusting myself. Like, it's one thing when clients are on the table versus walking into a room of, seminar participants. And I feel like I'm still the new kid on the block. I've never been here. I don't know what I'm doing. And the reality is I just have to take a step back and say, no, I know what I'm doing. Like, you wouldn't have been asked if you didn't know what you were doing. And the biggest piece is just showing up, right? Being myself, taking off that mask of nervousness and anxious or whatever it might be, and just being present. And so that's probably been one of the most wonderful gifts. The most recent one was Fascial Pelvis in Midland, Michigan. And it was so much fun. It was so much joy. And I think it was because I allowed the joy. I wasn't stopping it with the nerves or the what if I do this wrong, or all the doubt in the what's taking up headspace, versus just be here, be present, live from your heart.
I love that. I think something that John teaches us not to just do when we're myofascial release therapists, but in everyday life is to be present, to be centered, and to be aware. And it sounds like you have that. And something that you said is like, you get nervous, you get in your head, you channel five, what if I do it wrong? And I think sometimes people make that to be a bigger deal than it actually is. Because for me, it's like, what if I do it wrong? Yeah, what if I do it wrong? Then what? And it's like, as long as you don't keep doing it wrong, then you learn from your mistakes. But I think some people have such a fear because they're perfectionists, like we used to be, that like if you do something wrong, it means like the world is going to end or something like that. And I know that in the beginning, I put a lot of pressure on myself to do things right because I didn't want to do it wrong. But I think that put extra pressure on myself for no reason. I think if I looked back now and just said, hey, you're learning this thing that's brand new, and as long as you're helping others, then that's all that really matters. It's not really about you. And so you can take off all this performance anxiety, all this fear, and just say, hey, as long as I'm being present, as long as I'm dropping down, feeling, then I will be guided in the ways that I'm supposed to without me having to figure it out. And I know for me, I was a physical therapist. So when we go to PT school, it's all about that. So it's been a long journey to unlearn that. But I will say it was cool to learn from John because he's a PT and Rob because he's a PT. Had I not had them in some of my early seminars, I don't know if I would have continued on this path. And so, not to say that you have to be a PT, I know you're a massage therapist and a teacher, but we all come at myofascial release from different paths. And as long as we are going towards the same direction, then we can all help each other. Now, as a massage therapist, I think a term that gets thrown out there is holding space. Can you explain in your own words what it means to hold space for somebody?
I feel like that goes back into what we talked about earlier about being present and just showing up for that person in whatever way possible that I can in that moment, whether that's, allowing them to move through emotions, or allowing them to, have a quick conversation before things get started, or whatever that is, because most times you don't know what it is until you're in that moment. And just being present and available for them to let go of whatever it is that they need to let go of when they're on your table. That to me is the biggest thing when you're talking about like holding space. And there's different levels of being able to hold that space.
You got it. I think for me, when I was first getting introduced to myofascial release, and they said that, like hold space for them, hold space for them. I'm like, what does that even mean? And yes, it's about being present and centered. But essentially, in my own words, is, people think that you have to fix other people. Or a lot of us thinks that we have to fix other people. And it's not necessarily that. All someone wants is for you to sit in the mud with them and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. And as long as you're present and being active listening and doing these things, whether that's active listening with your ears or your hands, they feel that, and so that's what it means to hold space for somebody. It's just sitting in the mud with them, not trying to do anything extra. And I think John uses a great analogy of a helicopter to feel centered. He says, when a helicopter is hovering, and it's not going in any direction, that is when it's centered. But once it decides to go in any particular direction, then it becomes biased and you can't change it from that direction. And when we're doing myofascial release, we want to be the hovering helicopter where whenever something comes up, then we can adjust to it. But if we have our own biases or we're forcing or doing anything that's not just holding space and being centered, oftentimes you're going to be going down the wrong path. And it's when you're centered and present and intentional that there's this inner wisdom that just comes up. I think for me, I'm at this chapter in my life where I am starting to get treated regularly. Now, I will say that it's because I just injured my knee. I ended up tearing my right ACL in my right knee. And I don't want to get surgery, and there's this new research that says that your ACL can regrow. And now that I'm at where I'm a myofascial release therapist, now a physical therapist as well. I want to see what the natural healing properties are. And so when I now go to my MFR therapist to get treated, it is very much that. It's me being the receiver. Because I think sometimes I try to figure things out, or I try to be like, oh, how are they doing this or doing that? And for me, it's like, okay, just be a patient. Don't try to add anything, but definitely say whether it's ease up or halt, or, you still want to feel like you're in control. And especially for MFR therapists, if you don't already do so, make sure you give your patients and clients permission to say ease up or halt, because I think sometimes they'll look at us as the expert, but you don't do MFR to them, you do it with them. And so they really need to be part of the process. Otherwise, it doesn't go as well as it needs to. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing those things. I think it's shed a lot of insights on different avenues, and including myself. It's cool for me to have seen your growth, and even though you still kind of battle this monkey on your back, you've come a very long ways, I will say. And it's one of those things where I'm like very particular with who puts their hands on me. And I know that when you treated me, or we traded in the seminar, I was like, yo, you got it. But even though you got it, you could convince yourself that you didn't get it, and I think we do that. I know I did that. I did that in the very beginning where I'm like, okay, I know that I could do this. But man, my channel 5 is just like running rampant. That is the world that we grow up in. And so part of that is going through this journey of letting go and leading from your heart space. I was speaking with Richard Hardy, and he said, make sure that you lead with your heart first, and then your mind will follow. Because if it's in the reverse order, oftentimes you can convince yourself one way or the other, and you're just doing a lot of extra work, or you're fearing things that don't even play out that way. So can you just share with the audience how you've been able to navigate shifting from channel 5 to channel 3?
A lot of practice, a lot of tears. There's been some anger and frustration in there, but it really comes down to the just being present with myself. And I don't think I realized how present I wasn't originally, like that, checking out and taking off saying, see you later, and I'm not coming back. It was hard to come back in at first. And the idea of the practice, whatever that looks like, whether it's, sitting at a stoplight and your mind takes off and you're like, no, come back here. Like, just be present in the car with what's around you. And I think for me, it was super helpful to journal, and just that stream of whatever had to come out came out. And a lot of times those pages would get burned. And I didn't realize how, I almost want to say, unhealthy I was in my headspace, because there was so much negativity, but I didn't even see that. Like, I just thought that was, no, I want to do things well. I want to do things right. And I think it comes down to loving yourself. I didn't know how to love myself. And so little by little, piece by piece, that inner work, it allows you to love yourself more and just be grateful for all of the little things, even the things that frustrate you, like you said, whether it's with someone else, whether it's something that happens with you, whether you I don't know, forget to put a stamp on a Christmas card or whatever it might be, and it gets sent back, and you're like, oh, okay. I think I had turned everything into something that was so big and didn't need to be, but didn't even see that either. So this is just living in a whole new space, and I'm loving every minute of it. And I wish I would have found it about, 30 years ago, but I'm grateful that I'm here now.
That's right. It's not about what you wish you had in the past, it's where you're at in the present. Now, I have heard that, you got to learn how to love yourself. Can you unpack that in terms of like, what does that mean exactly to you, and how would you coach somebody else into loving themselves more?
I think I feel like there are so many different facets of loving yourself, but the biggest for me, I would say, would be embracing every part of me. Like, not just, oh, I'm going to love myself and everything's great, but loving myself through those tough times and those tears or that anger or the screaming into the pillow or whatever it is. Just knowing that, like, I have myself and I've always had myself. And even though I had given my power away at times, unknowingly at the time, loving myself and looking at it as a, hey, you did the best you could. And I know, talking about, when John says, tell yourself you survived at the beginning, I was like, tell myself what? Like, I'm still here. Like, I didn't go anywhere. And now I see how powerful that is looking back. Like, I did survive a lot of things. And there were parts of me that I didn't even realize that I was in survival mode from. So the loving me is like being able to embrace all of it, the most beautiful pieces you could possibly have, like with friendships and things like externally, but more importantly, those internal things and where you're coming from and the experiences you've had that allow you to continue to love yourself even more. Like, I thought I loved myself a year ago, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, I love you so much more now than I did a year ago. um, just with more growth and being able to honor those spaces that I was in and things that I've been through.
I love that. I think something that John says is you can only take someone as far as you've gone. And when I hear your story, you have gone through some of the deepest parts of yourselves. And now you're able to use that to help somebody else. I think firmly that we go through challenges and obstacles, not just to do that, but once you learn the tools on how to get through it, now you have the tools to help somebody go through that same process. And I know that as myofascial release therapists, we do this, right? We help others process their emotions because we have felt them ourselves. And the more that you can feel those things, then the more vocabulary and vernacular you have to help someone feel validated, to understand where they're coming from, to essentially empathize with them and help them take their next step in their life, not to fix them, but to allow them to step through that. And I'll say that seeing your journey, you've gone from I survived to now I'm thriving. So I just want to say kudos to you. Now, before we wrap up, is there anything last thing that you'd like to share with my audience?
Whether you're, somebody who's considering myofascial release, whether you've received myofascial release, whether you're a therapist, just keep going. Like, I mean, this life is meant to be lived and we only get one right now this time around. Make the most of it and just know that some of your most challenging things in life will end up being your biggest propellers forward, and trust the process.
Absolutely. And how do people find you?
They can call me, email me. I don't know if you want me to give you the details now or later.
Do email. Share your email, and so that if someone wants to work with you in your area, they can find you or reach out to you.
Sounds good. It's bozennaj@gmail.com. That's BOZ as in zebra, E as in elephant, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, A as in apple, J@gmail.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being open and honest. It's so great to reconnect with you. You're the big sister I never had, and I wish you very well. Thank you.
Love you, little brother. Thanks for having me.
Love you too. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Myofascial Health. I help myofascial release therapists create beautiful websites for their MFR practices, even if they aren't tech savvy. If you're just starting your MFR practice, or you're an experienced MFR practice owner, learn more about how I can help at www.myofascial.health/website.